Welcome to the Sports Science Dudes. I am your host, Dr. Jose Antonio, with my inimitable co-host, Dr. Tony Ricci. If you're a first-time listener, hit the subscribe button and like the show. I know a lot of you download the podcast, but if you happen to be on YouTube, which apparently not many people go on YouTube these days,
not for this.
like the show. We're also on Rumble, Spotify, and like I said, Apple Podcasts. Our special guest today, actually, he's making a reappearance. We didn't get enough of him the first time around. Is Bob Alejo, and interestingly, I just found out because I was wondering where Bob is these days. He's currently the assistant strength and conditioning coach for the Los Angeles Angels MLB team.
Yeah, congrats. Fantastic.
Yeah. Thanks, back guys. To MLB, which is, kind of really where you belong. This is your bread and butter.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was somehow just, it vaporized in my head over the last year or so. And I'm just it kept hitting me like, okay, I got to follow this a little bit. And then things really fell into place. So it wasn't like I was out there diving and searching every day, but all of a sudden it's here and it worked out great.
Hey, sometimes, things fall into place and it works out perfectly, but you have really a stellar career. And it's always good to pick your brain when it comes to strength and conditioning. Actually, for about 3 years, you were the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Performance and Student Athlete Welfare at CSU in Northridge.
Yes, sir.
Prior to that, sort of a little bit overlapping, you were the Director of Sports Science with Powerlift, which is kind of cool. And also, you had some involvement in the working with the Olympics. This was you did 80 U.S. Olympic team, 2008 Beijing, 2012 London, as the strength coach for the men's beach volleyball team, Todd Rogers and Phil Dahlhauser. They got in fact, they got the gold, 2008, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Oh, wow. So you've worked with a lot of high-end athletes, and obviously at the college level, I mean, you're working literally with hundreds of people. Now that you're back to MLB, you're literally working with how many?
Well, I mean, I like to think I have a wider range of effect, but, I think even in the big leagues, you're kind of setting the foundation and message for the rest of the affiliates, right? The minor league systems and all that. So, but during the season, typically 25 are right in front of you, and then you have the 40-man roster. And so it's, it's the pros, and it's right there in front of you. So it's a smaller group, but very individualized.
Hell of a lot different than college, where you have multiple sports. You're dealing with both male and female athletes, very young athletes. Right. So, and also you're dealing with poor athletes in college. Well, a lot of them are poor. There's some that are rich now, but a lot of them are poor. Whereas in MLB, no one's poor.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
So, what do you think the biggest difference is now? If someone wants to get work in the strength and conditioning field as a strength coach, there's always talk of, I want to work with the pros. I want to work at the college level. I want to work at the high school level. Maybe I'll do one-on-one training. Explain, because you have a wealth of experience, explain sort of the differences. I know with a lot of my students and Tony's students, they have this idea that, well, I want to work with pro teams because that's cool and that's glamorous. And there's not that many pro teams.
There's not that many. No, there's not. Well, I think, one of the things I've learned from folks like both of you is that, you have to make sure that you've got a solid intent. Like, what is your intent? Mm-hmm. And I think us here, we're educators. We say coaches, and I think we're educators. That's what we try to do. And I think as we morph, in fact, I know as we get older, we're more about education and giving forth than anything, right? So I mean, It's strength and conditioning for sure. Tony, we're fixers too, right?
Yep.
You're weak, we'll make you strong. You don't jump high, we'll make you jump high. You're slow, we'll make you fat. Whatever it might be. So I think the first thing is you got to get that focus. And if you get that focus, that'll help you go to the next step, which is the pros, the college, at whatever level you want. And that's really, I think, the key, because I've never really set out to go pro, to go college. I just set out to go to a good job, help somebody win a championship, get stronger, get faster, get less injured, and all that. It really has been it. You work hard and things get going, all of a sudden you're going to get recognized for what you do as you are giving forward, right? You're giving forward. I think the other thing too is, when folks ask you about the pros, and they, for all of us here, I would say that the best job in the world is the one that you think is the best job in the world. I mean, now that we're older and wiser, we can say, well, it's that, there's plenty of high school jobs that are admirable and very noble, and college jobs are that way, but not every one of those is great. Not every one of the college, not every one of the pro jobs, is great. So I think it's figuring out exactly that. And, I think if you're looking for the glitz and the glamour and the money, all of us would agree that that's not the first thing you think of if you want to have the best career, right? I don't think any of us really, if you're debating about one job or another, the same job, and one's more money than the other, that perhaps could matter, but sometimes that doesn't matter either. I just got a job I only have to commute a little bit down the street versus, getting a job in maybe New York, which doesn't help my family and my son who goes to high school right down the street here, right? Or my other son who works full time down the street over here. So, but when people talk about what's the biggest difference, the biggest difference is between college and pros that one you work with kids and the other one you work with adults, and that is vastly different. The first thing that pops into your mind, if you haven't been as aged as we are, is, oh man, they're just older. But that's not the only thing that adults have. Adults have spouses, adults have children. In the pros, every one of those guys is the CEO of themselves, right? Those contracts are big. They got a bunch of people to pay. It's a monster, right? So sometimes not getting a workout in is because your child has chickenpox, or it's your anniversary, or and you're not going to grab a guy because he's not doing that, right? So there's you talk about nuance. That's really the piece. It's not. We can talk about the training or not, but I think more than anything, if you talk about training specifically, what do you think the difference of training is? That one is not developmental. In other words, if you're in the big leagues, you're not going to develop yourself into a big leaguer. You're there. That's you're playing. Now you can maybe perhaps help the training make their career extend or make them less injured and everything. But I would say you need to be less of a risk taker. I use risk. That's probably not the term, but we're not all interested in doing whatever we can to make this guy jump higher or this girl jump higher and run faster, because likely they already do that. So you're kind of your main focus is not that. And when the season's over, they're gone, right? So you're going to be in touch with them, but they don't live there. Much like college now, they can go to summer school and they stay on campus and all that. And these folks have, that's their job, so they're going to go do their business somewhere else at some point and show up later. But really, I think my number one thing would be, well, one is you're working with adults, and the other is you're working with kids.
Tony, that. Oh, go ahead.
On, no, I was just going to say too. When you bring that up, it is good reinforcement, Bob. Because at the elite level, I do think we lose. Certainly, as a fan, unequivocally, we lose the touch of them being a human and an adult, and nothing more than a robot that's supposed to perform at an elite athletic level with no other focus in life, no other interests in life. Like that, if you look at how NFL players are viewed, that's it, right? They're supposed to go out there. They got to be hit. They got to be faster. They got to be stronger. They got to be hungry. They can't make mistakes. And I think then we hear a story of, how they help some kids on the side. We're almost surprised, but we definitely, I think, unintentionally dehumanize them sometimes without intent. It's just these robotic athletes, and it's you forget that they got a lot of challenges just to survive every day, despite the fact that we think they're lucky and blessed.
Well, and they are, right, and I think most of them feel that way. I would say this though, let's just take it forward. Rather than when I started my career in the early 80s. Now we have technology. So let's just use that for a second. Let's say we're tracking an athlete, right? Let's say we're tracking an athlete and it's on whatever GPS and whatever else we got there. And we're finding out that his velocities or her velocities are down and they're not jumping as high and all that. And you're like, we need to get some plyometrics. This person's really not having some neural activation. And, we talk about all the things that you guys have taught me about. And then you go, wow, let's get some training going. Let's call them in. Hey, Ed, you find Julie, you find you have a little problem right here. We're going to get some training in. And you're like, what's really the problem? my son has got tonsillitis, so I've been up 3 nights in a row until midnight, and he's got to get surgery here pretty soon. So you're like, oh, so it's not training, right?
Right.
So, those are the things that now you have to consider when you're, although we're delving much deeper into the, some of the mental aspects, or, it could be as much as, my wife and I are getting along. My mom passed away. My brother's going through a bankruptcy. I mean, all these things that nobody sees, right? Oh, I can't believe he dropped that pass. How's he not playing today? Like he just didn't show up to camp. Well, that's between the coach and the manager and the GM and all that. They said, "Oh, you need to go home, man. We'll cover for you." And it says, unavailable. And that's all we're going to talk about, right? Which that's part of it too. So it's not, you're right. I mean, these people have lives. And again, they're the CEO of their own business. So they should have a little bit of say in how things go on. And, the last thing you want to do is put yourself in a position that makes them do something, and then there's an adverse effect, whatever the heck, right? And then you get all the glitz and glamour you want because you're going to be in the paper the next day.
Right.
Well, I felt, you look a little slow out there and you pulled up, how bad? Well, I was talking to, the strength coach this morning. He felt like we should go for a run, and, maybe that could have been part of it. Like, now your name's on the ticker that you always dreamt about.
Yeah, you're far more inclined to get blamed than you are credit, I'm sure,
Yeah. And so, there's some things to talk about. And there's, then it gets deeper and deeper the more you go. But you're right. I think we do dehumanize it a whole bunch. And, these people have the same problems we have. You hate to dumb it down to something simple, but they're making great money, have high incomes, but they still have problems. They're still humans. And I found in my situation where I've been professionally and at the Olympic level, I find them way more human than you could ever suggest. And so I've not really run into, but I've heard about them. We all have, very, I don't know, tough to work with athletes. They just think that this is who they are instead of what they do. Right. I've ran into to some great human beings that were just very generous with the kind of people they were, and just happened to be that elite level athlete.
Question, Bobby.
Sure.
And this can apply to any sport.
Okay.
Can you be too strong? Can you have too much muscle mass?
Never.
Before you answer that, the reason I ask is we all know Juan Carlos Santana. He was on our show earlier. And he said, what are strength coaches paid to do? Well, they're paid to make you stronger. I mean, sort of in a simplistic way.
Correct.
He said, well, okay, a basketball player comes up to him and says, I want to increase my vertical jump. And he's like, well, why? Well, because I want to jump higher. And he's like, well, when you shoot from the 3-point line, you're not really getting off the ground much. You're not a volleyball player and you're not dunking the ball. So why do we need to increase your vertical jump? So it goes to the question of how strong you really need to be. And like with football, well, let's put muscle on you. We need lean mass. Okay, well, to a point, I would imagine that's important. But then there might be a point where it's detrimental based on, the muscle to bone ratio and all that fun stuff. So it's a broad question. How would you address it? And you could pick whatever sport you want. You could pick baseball.
Well, I mean, I don't think you have to pick a note one on this. I think Tony would agree. He's nodding his head like, I know that Jim Schmitz used to own a place called the Sports Palace. Do you know that? If you're familiar with the name Jim Schmitz in Olympic lifting?
No.
But one of the greatest of all time coaches, was an Olympic team coach and all that. But he owns a place called the Sports Palace where I actually competed. Sometimes he'd have these meets, it'd be like 20 people in it. There'd be an Olympian, me, and somebody else. It was crazy. But he used to make a shirt that had like a bicep pose, and it said, "You can never be too strong." And I agree. You can never be too strong. Strength is never a debit. Now people say, "Oh yeah, you don't need so much strength, and you can spend too much time on it." Well, that wasn't the question. The question is, can you ever be too strong?
Big difference.
That question, yes. The question is, no, you can never be too strong. The answer is yes, you can work on strength too much.
Great point.
Right. So, and I think the only time that, when you get to the muscularity that bodybuilders have, like, that's just not, well, for them, it works out perfectly. But if you're trying to tumble or jump up for a pass or dunk a ball or, run the 5'10" to the 5'10" 5 drill, that's going to be tough for you, So, but I think if it cuts off your range of motion and it takes away from your hypertrophy level, has now taken away from your ability to perform sport specific skills, then yes, that is a detriment.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, that's the big debate. I think people like to hear the question differently so they can make their point. Yeah, you can spend too much time. There's something else you can get so strong, and you only need to be so strong to be so fast and all that. Like, well, that's not the question. The question is strength ever a problem? The answer is no. A lack of it, yes. But I'd say no.
Yeah, no, I love that answer because, and I think JC meant this too. Like his point was, if you're training to the point, right, where your volumes, your intensity is so high and your loads are so high that skill acquisition or even skill maintenance is being negatively impacted, then you're doing too much. But if you can do it in 1 or 2 sets, obviously you can't. But if hypothetically you could, and you can continue to make maximum strength gains, then it would not be detrimental. I agree with you, and I think distinguishing between those two is a really important point. Yeah.
And get back to the intent, right? If your intent is to be more powerful, at some point you got to realize the equation has time involved with it. So if you're trying to, squeeze water out of a rock by trying to get your squat to go from 500 to 600, and that's going to make you more powerful, the likelihood that you be better off increasing speed by point something seconds is probably your better bet to get a better power output.
Right.
So that's the only thing I can ever think of. If you're thinking we're just going to continually get stronger to get faster, you can monitor that. We know that. We've always done that. Now we just have a better account of what that is. But and that's the idea that you handle strength too much. But here's what I see, and I answered this question the other day. Like, strength coaches, they still spend too much time in strength, and I say, I don't think so as much anymore. I think we got velocity-based training, we got all kind of timing mechanisms and tracking. I don't think they do. In fact, I think it's gone the other way. I think they're doing too much work with lighter weights too fast, trying to get powerful. And in the end, we know this too, that they spend so much time doing lightweight so fast that they get the opposite effect. Their power starts to decrease because they're not feeding the other side of the equation.
Wow.
So anyway,
that makes sense. Yeah.
Right?
Let me ask you this: have you worked with tennis players before? You have, haven't? Yeah. So you have a tennis player, great baseline game, but the serve is average, right? They're not going to beat you with a serve. So say, coach, hey, I need more velocity in that ball on that first serve. Obviously, there's skill involved. Obviously, that's a high skill movement. But there's also, you got to generate power. So if you are the skill coach as working with the strength and conditioning coach, there's only so much time of the day where he or she still has to practice tennis. I mean, that is the main thing. How do you divvy up that time between, okay, we're going to do some weight work, but we also need to do skill work? Or there's not a clear-cut answer because obviously each individual, athlete, will respond differently. So thoughts?
You just outlined the discussion just right there. You said it all. We only have so much time. What's your intent? What's the value? What are we getting out of that? And then you just come to a decision. And sometimes, Joey, those decisions are, it's probably not in our best interest to do it then, because she's got a great baseline game. She's playing, she's healthy. Let's leave it alone. Or if he says, I think we can score more points that way. Okay, well, here's what it's going to take. I've had this conversation in baseball before, where we had a player that was, probably was average speed, but they were gonna end up hitting about 40 homers, and they eventually did, and get about 120, 130 RBIs, right? So the idea is that the guys behind him, we call it, what's it called? Like jamming up the bases. Like we can't, we can hit the ball somewhere, but we can't run faster than he is in front of us, is basically what the adage is. And they said, we need to make him faster. Well, this was during the season. So I said, okay, well, what are you trying? Well, we need to get him to, score from second on a base hit and all this other stuff. And I said, well, okay, well, I can do that, but that kind of training is not easy. I can do it, and it's going to take a while. But if we do that type of training to make him faster, all that work, that means he's going to not give me 40 and 120. I mean, it's going to be like a 25 and an 80. Oh, well, we can't have that. I said, well, you can't have both. I mean, that player is a Willie Mays. You know what I mean? Like you can't produce those guys. He's some of these guys you see today, like that's not what we're doing, and so we can't have that. And I said, well, I mean, that's what's going to happen. So was it worth it? Then it's not. Like, hey, you got to settle with that then, right? Same kind of thing. Those discussions now, the performance unit has to include the coach for the very reason you just talked about. There's only so much time to practice baseball, tennis, golf, badminton, wrestling, gymnastics. What else can you put into that that's not going to jeopardize or compromise their commitment? I had the same thing with the tracking. We had the GPS and all that, and I was mapping out what I wanted to do in soccer for that practice. And I said, you just, basically what I do is you give me the drills. I'll tell you what the cost of those drills are, and we can tell you how long you're going to do it. So I had this drill, and he said, that's just not enough time for that drill. And I said, well, you're going to have to take that time out of somewhere else or add it somewhere else. But why are you saying that? And the simplest, greatest answer I'd ever heard, because that's not enough soccer. Good point.
Mm-hmm.
Then I say, well, we can't do that. We'll leave that alone. Then we'll pluck it out of somewhere else. And that's the value. I know this, and I know I'm telling you guys this, but for all you sports fans out there, these conversations have to have some context of sport. They can't just be time and units and numbers and percentages and R values and correlations. It's what does that actually mean? The soccer part, and that's where the value of the coaches come in. And you have to understand what that all means to be able to speak soccer, speak volleyball, speak football. You got to speak that language so that you can get the word across the best way. And that was, in my 39th year, that was one of the most riveting responses I've gotten to somebody about a sport and strength and conditioning question. Like, well, that's just not enough soccer. And I understand that game very well. So I said, can't have that then.
Can I, Tony, I want you, after I ask Bobby this question about baseball, just sort of as a baseball fan, I want you to talk about the data we've collected from the UFCPI, because a lot of it is related to this. But this is my question in terms of baseball. I'm not a big baseball fan today. I used to be a huge fan, and you would know these names because we're the same generation. I used to follow the Washington Senators. That's how.
Oh, yeah.
I remember Frank Howard. Back then, I think
Howard.
there was Harmon Killebrew. He was a great hitter. I even remember watching Roberto Clemente. We're going way back.
Yeah.
But so I kind of lost track of baseball, and I started to follow more football and track and field. But anyways, my question is this. There's a Japanese guy who can pitch and he can hit. An absolute unicorn. Why do we never see that in baseball? And particularly, you will never see that in American baseball, whether it's travel, college, or the pros. Talk a little bit about how you view Shohei Ohtani and he's injured now, but what the hell? He was ripping up the league with his pitching and his hitting. Best hitter by far.
Yeah. Oh, look, so maybe a couple of quick. I think you see that a lot at the younger ages because that's just the way it is, and I don't think it might be a little bit different now, but back, 20, 30 years ago, your pitcher, right, was probably your shortstop when he wasn't pitching.
Right.
Yeah. Probably your quarterback on the football team, and it's probably your point guard on the baseball team. On the basketball team.
The best athlete. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then when he wasn't pitching, he would hit. Otherwise, your chances of winning was going to be reduced. And then I think as they get older, they get kind of specialized in what they are. But very few are so good at both. I mean, think about football, another perfect example. I mean, I think it's likely just the stressor of those levels being so great that you couldn't do both. I mean, think about all the running backs and wide receivers that played defense too, that were really good. Ken Norton Jr. is a perfect example of, who was a great linebacker in football for us at UCLA. He was a fullback who scored 30 touchdowns or something in his senior year. Like, he's really good, but you get to a point where you don't do that. I think that's why I think at some level it's just allowed, but we don't even hear about it. Like, we don't even hear about it in America, to your point, of like a senior in high school or somebody in college, maybe somebody might DH, but there's so much going on at pitching, and there's so much going on with hitting that it just gets so much in there. And he is, I think the unicorn gets thrown out there too many times, but who knows where that guy is? There may be somebody to be able to do that, but I think they get to that point where they got to decide, if I'm this good, I can be really good on this side of the ball or really good on this side of the ball. And that's probably how it ends up.
So which side of the ball do you think he's better at?
I have no idea. I mean, I don't know that he's any, I don't know how you, that would be a pitching coach, hitting coach thing. Much as I've been involved in the game and played, I think it's one of those, Kobe or Michael Jordan or LeBron. And you sit there and you just debate until it stays tied forever, right? Because I think the argument's pretty balanced.
Apparently he's a good center fielder too.
I wouldn't doubt it. Wouldn't doubt it. Yeah, I am not putting myself in the roast for that one. You pick one side. He's unbelievable. I mean that's, again, another term that's used too often, but this one is almost not believable.
Yeah. Tony, talk a little bit about the data we've collected with the UFCPI and how some of the data, this is real world data. These aren't randomized controlled trials, but talk about that data in terms of how it applies to MMA training.
Well, a good deal of the data that we have currently is related to body fat mostly the body fat and the weight cutting. So not exclusively, but we're putting together more data in collaboration with them. But I think the important part goes to what Bob said earlier. Okay, there's very little utility in any information in human performance training if you cannot collaborate what needs to be done and needs to be addressed first on the skill side and fully understand the volume, the intensity, the training, and the scheduling of what goes on that side first. So coach who said to you, that's too little soccer, until you can understand in strength and conditioning, we could take all these numbers, right, and we can get the body fat. We're working with a lot of boxers down here too, and getting the, a lot of work in force production, testing force, anaerobic power, and so forth. I think the key is taking the data that you have, as to your point earlier, Bob, finding out where there may be potential places that we can augment or advance those particular qualities, but having to couple that with what's going on already in total training volumes. Because when you come into fight performance, particularly the field of MMA, you're not training it's not boxing in a sense where you're doing a variety of skill training and different drills and then bag work and then mitts and then light sparring and maybe some road work. These guys are training 3 or 4 disciplines almost every day. Accordingly, their training volumes are so significant. What we have to do with that data is say, okay, first, a lot of it's we used in the weight cutting side with the UFCPI. We've taken a look at those averages. So what are we going to do to try to make that more effective? Well, we could present certainly nutritional protocols, training protocols. Are they going to follow it? It hopefully. Secondarily, we have to again address the primary objective, which is skill acquisition. And until the strength or the performance coach puts out and looks at the total training volumes of time in the gym, time on the mitts, time in the cage, you can't adjust an effective, or you can't develop an effective performance program. We are reduced in our side, Joey, to such a minimal dose for maximum result because of those sheer volumes. So the data that we have, where may be there a potential weakness, right? Okay, guys got outstanding endurance, can throw 200 punches around, but can't knock over a milk carton. Well, maybe we can help that quality. Maybe we could potentiate that quality a little bit more to an extent. Like you said earlier, Bob, we're not going to take the guy who's batting at one level, get him faster, and then allow them to continue to hit. Or maybe vice versa. Maybe we can improve their endurance a little bit by taking off some weight that need not be there, by using a cluster set approach in their training capacity. They're already too strong. They already got plenty of power. So what do? We go to the lighter loads. We go to the shorter rest intervals. So I think all we can do with the data we have is it has to be presented it should be presented to the head coach of the team, talk in great discussion with them, ask them what they're working on. And this is what I always did with Ray Longo, and then just simply said, here's what we know. What do you think you want to do with it? He'll tell me, and then we adjust the program accordingly. We're getting some really valuable data in collaboration with the UFCPI, right? But again, they have the capacity to, they have the coaches on site, so they can collaborate directly with a lot of the coaches as well. But nevertheless, to me, what I've learned through the years, the problem in strength and conditioning is people think they are the head coach or the skill coach or the bench coach, when most of the time they're the bullpen coach and no more than a bullpen coach. So you got it. Once you realize that, you could be far more effective. That's at least in my discipline. It's a little different in track and field. It's a little different in, I think, American football.
Yeah.
These guys don't have off seasons like you all do.
Yeah.
So nevertheless, take the data we have and see what we can do in concert with the skill coaches, because a lot of skill coaches in fighting have a negative impression of of strength coaches for the right reasons.
Do they? Oh, shoot. Okay.
Yes. Crazy training volumes, crazy training techniques, impeding or telling them how to skill train. Believe me, I've seen it. It could be a big problem in our side of it.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Well,
I could say the answer that I did give, when I've been working with this coach for a while. As soon as he said, well, that's just not enough soccer, I immediately said, we can't. It wasn't even a thought. It just clicked. Okay, well then we got to do something else. Where I'm not sure that answer would have been the same for me 10 or 15 years ago. I'm not saying I would debate it. I probably would have dove a little bit like, well, perhaps this and that. And I don't even do that anymore because of what you just said. Like, if this stops him from throwing one less punch, I can't do it. That's what I would.
Exactly. That was my point. And Joey's right. We're getting great data. And all we could do, and what do we do with it? We present it. Here's what you got. Hey, coach, here you go. Here's what it means. How can we help you? That has always been my approach,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And I think you both point to the limitations of the involvement of the strength coach within the sport itself. And, and Tony and I have talked about this. We do the simple stuff. Hey, sleep more. That helps. Here's some nutrition. That's pretty simple. That helps. Here's some supplements. That could help. That's pretty simple. Pragmatic question about, this is training frequency, and you could apply it to other sports or maybe to yourself or any individual you've worked with. How often do you think an athlete, and you can choose any athlete, endurance athlete, speed, power athlete, whatever, can do high intensity interval training per week? Just ballpark. How often per week do you think someone could do that? Or let's say it's a competitive athlete.
Well, so we just finished this conversation about this very global approach to each person. I'm going to say once.
What do you think, Tony?
Well, I think it's contingent upon what their skill invests in. Like if you're a boxer, everything you do is high interval.
Right.
So then I would definitely go with Bob and say ones, because anything more than that is going to blow him out of the water.
Exactly.
I see. Because because training itself is so high intensity that.
Well, right, Joey,
Right.
these guys, you see some of the skill training sessions, you know, how they're throwing 50, 60 rear leg round kicks on Muay Thai pads while striking. This is going on for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? I mean, and then what am I going to do? You know, run 200s with them, 10 to 15 of those 3 times a week. You know, it just, but maybe in baseball a bit more because of the time, you know, Bob would know better than I, but look at also what are the demands of the skill application?
Mm-hmm.
And if HIIT is absent, they can probably take a little bit.
Let's do I'll call them the simpler sports, the podium sports, run, bike, swim. Mm-hmm. What would it be for the run, bike, swim sports? Once a week, twice a week?
I can, you know, let's think about it, and I do it myself, right? I mean, I do it, and I've gone down to 1 time a week but I mean, I think that the issue with high intensity training is not whether or not it works. It's, does it work for what you want it to work? You know, so for baseball, what would high intensity training do for baseball? Nothing. You know, I mean, like, would they get fitter? Oh yeah, they get fitter. You know, but to do what? You know, exactly. Like so that would be my thing. But my first thought was what we just talked about. Like, what is that going to do with the swing and the run and the everyday and all that stuff in baseball? Like, I don't see it. I see, you know, again, everybody starts coming up with these brand new terms, microdosing shit. I was doing that 20 years ago, you know, like just figuring it out just because here's how much time you have. Like, you know, I was doing it with baseball, right? You know, guys, we finished our games at 10 o'clock at night. Last thing I want to do is weight lift for an hour, especially if we had 2 strikeouts and a foul ball caught and we lost. You know, like, who wants to do that? So I went down to, like, you know, 10-minute lifting sessions. Body part only.
Are you familiar with the term polarized training?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Tony, are you familiar with polarized training?
The term, yeah.
Yeah, it's in the endurance world, it's you do 80% sort of what's called steady state or sort of lower intensity training, and then the other 20% is high intensity interval training, sprint interval training. So supposedly in the endurance world, that's the model that people use. So and the reason I asked you guys this question, because I get asked that question a lot too, and my pat answer is almost always, I can't see anyone doing more than 2 hard interval training sessions a week. Okay.
Right.
And I've been saying that for years. However, my wife is a national class cyclist, and I asked her to track her training from February till she won the USA Cycling Nationals senior game. She was first place.
Okay.
She does 5 HIIT sessions a week. Averaging about 8 to 9 total training sessions per week. So 55% of her training sessions are high intensity interval training. 55%.
In cycling only, right?
This is cycling only. I'm like, and actually my kids say the same thing. They're like, how do you recover? And I still ask her that. I don't know how you recover. She's like, I just recover. I mean, she sleeps well, right? She takes every supplement I tell her to take. She eats well. Her protein intake is like 3 grams per kilo. But it's made me reevaluate the idea of how hard can you train, the frequency of hard training per week. I'm like, twice a week? And I've decided, this is my answer now. It's as many times as you can, as long as you recover. And here's the thing, right? And if she was losing, I'd be like, okay, maybe we should dial it back. But she's winning. So I no longer give the 1 to 2 times per week anymore, because I'm staring at the data. I mean, I actually compiled it myself. I'm like, you're doing 5 HIIT training sessions a week. I mean,
what distance does Carla cycle, Joey?
I'm sorry?
What distances does she cycle?
Oh, she most of her races are time trials. So she does 5K and 10K time trials. She was the USA cycling champion for the 5K and 10K time trial.
Okay.
She does other things, like in the cycling world, you have gravel races and then you have road races. there's all sorts of different types of races. The one thing she doesn't like to do are mountain bike races. It's way too technical for her. But she sends me all her training every day. I'm like, so you did another HIIT training session? She's like, well, I guess you could call it that. I mean, every day I'm like, wow, you did another HIIT session. What the hell? I mean, if I did this on a paddleboard, I would be dead. I would be dead. And here's the thing. I'm like, I told her, if you were on the juice, you'd be like Superwoman.
Yes. Put her in the tour.
How long are those sessions? Is she doing the typical Tabata stuff, like 4 to 6 minutes?
Oh no, much longer. This is
so what percentage heart rate is she at?
Oh, I don't have the heart rate data, but it's like between 80 to 95% of max heart rate. And she's averaging 167 miles a week, peaking as close as high as 300 miles a week. She'll taper a week before the race, but the thing is, since I live with her, I know the volume she's doing.
Yeah.
So this goes completely against the polarized bullshit 80-20 ratio and all that. And I'm thinking, basically, her coach, she works with someone online, has her train as hard as possible, dials it back a little, trains hard as possible, dials it back a little. And it's sort of a weekly up, down, up, down, up, down. There's not even periodization. So this is when you work with a real person, you're like, okay, that's the rules. That's not what the rules say in the textbook. And here's the other thing where the rules don't make any sense. Oh, carbohydrate intake for endurance athletes, get 8 to 10 grams per kilo.
Right,
I don't know a single human being that does 8 to 10 grams per kilo.
There's no way. It's like 4,000 calories a day in carbs alone.
Right. In fact, you would say her carb intake's kind of low for an endurance person. She gets like 3 grams per kilo. I'm like, that's what I get, 3 grams per kilo.
So I have 2 things to say about that. When you said, train as hard as you can and then recover. I think that the answers that Tony and I gave you were based on that, right, Tony?
Yeah.
You feel like that's about right because it's so damn hard. But here's my question to you. Isn't that all the same though? Aren't we training athletes individually to see how that goes? Like I think Chris Beardsley put something out the other day and talked about hypertrophy being, based within weeks. But at the same time, those with more muscle damage don't adapt to hypertrophy as good that those that have recovered. So it's not just between sets, it's between days and weeks. So my question, so this is that normal thing, like, well, so-and-so did that, and you go like, yeah, okay, well, I know there's probably some little old grandma in the mountains in Tennessee that have chewing tobacco and drank liquor every day of her life, and she doesn't get cancer. Does that mean I should do the same thing? Like, there's a pretty good chance that's not going to work for everybody. So my question to you would be this then. If somebody came to you and asked for a HIIT program that were cyclists, and let's say they're intermediate cyclists, right?
Yeah.
Would you give them your wife's program or start them out with one session and say, let's see how that goes?
I would not give them my wife's program. That's one, because I think it would kill most people. I would actually, I would be more conservative and I would dial it up depending on how they adapt.
Right.
And in fact, I would probably start with your basic 80-20 rule, 80% easy, 20% really hard, and then figure out, God, maybe it could be a 50-50 rule.
Right.
But I guess it's just interesting that when you, and we've talked about this, when you look at the literature, obviously it's based on sort of broad generalities. It's like, it seems to work most of the time. And then you run into an athlete, the Shohei Ohtanis of the world, people who like obviously can do much more HIIT training than quote the literature says. And it's like, okay, well, maybe that's what separates good people from really good people or great athletes,
Yeah, that's a great point. But in her case, in Carla's case, though, Joey, HIIT is also part of her direct conditioning. So what I meant earlier is if my fighters are going 4 or 5 HIIT sessions with grappling, mitt work, bag work, and then sparring, I can't add 2, 3, or 4 sessions on top of that, right? Of additional, they're already doing it. It's almost comparable to what Carla does in that she's got 4 or 5 HIIT sessions on that bike a week.
Yeah.
These guys got 4 or 5 HIIT sessions in their skill training all week. So I just can't add to that too much, because then I think I would be like, if we took a wide receiver and put them on college cycling program.
Yeah.
I don't think they're getting off the line of scrimmage very well.
No.
Well,
But-
let me ask you this, Tony. But if you wouldn't subject your wrestlers to HIIT grappling, right? What you're talking about, would there be an instance where you'd say that would be too hard, but I could put them on the bike?
Oh yeah, I do think so. Yes, and I think that would be in many cases. The answer to that would be yes, and I would look for a discipline in my case another modality, if you will, that isn't as weight bearing and joint taxing, because that's part of the problem too. It's not just skeletal muscle or cardiorespiratory recovery; it's the pounding that the joints are taking. So now if I've got them 5 days in a week, kicking things, breaking things, have their wrist, getting all banged up and striking, and now I'm putting them and running hills on top of that, and that's just more joint wear and tear. So I think, Bob, to your point, yes, I'd probably put them in the pool, and none of them can swim well, so that's going to be HIIT.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's why
Get one lap in, let's recover for 30 seconds and go get another lap. And at least we take some joint pressure off too,
I got there's a great antidote for me. So I had my soccer team at UCLA. It was arguably over those 10 years, we had more UCLA kids on the national team, Olympic team, and World Cup team than any school in anywhere. But we went into Poly Pavilion. It was, I can't remember, it was rain or somebody. Went in Poly Pavilion, put them on the floor, took the bleachers were already out, right? They're already back. So it's the giant gym, right? Where you can get the other courts on the side of the court. And these guys, they played basketball. They ran all over the place and they were exhausted. Now the score was only like 4-2, but they couldn't shoot worth a crap. Man, they went all over the place, and that was the thing. Like, they were having so much fun and laughing the whole time too. Is probably
that's a great point.
Just as
breaking
much,
it up with something they enjoy. Really good point on that, though.
That's one thing to get away from the whole idea of, well, we're doing this stuff. But so I'm thinking about, it's still stress though, right? I mean, even though you're not banging and grappling, then I got to think like, well, if you guys can do that, maybe that's almost, of course, we're talking about, we're making up stories here, but how much more would they get fitter if you could say you could do? It's one of those things, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it, right? Yeah. So I just that's a great. Well, here's another thing, right? When I first started training basketball teams back in the early '80s, I had UCLA basketball, and I thought I wrote this thing up pretty good. We're going to go 400s and 300s and 200s and 150 yards. Well, at the end of one of the workouts, one of the guys goes, "It's a good workout, but I just didn't get that same feeling, that burnt." This is what he told me. Don McClain told me this. #1 scorer in UCLA history still. I didn't get that same burn, when you get going in court and in transition, and when you stop and you got to shoot a free throw. I didn't get that here. I go, God damn. Okay, so I had to change it. So that was like your wife, like, just do it, well, that wasn't good enough. Okay, so what do you say? Oh, no, that's good enough. No, because he the way he described it was basketball. When you go in transition back and forth, you get a steal, basket, turn around, game's getting tight, and you get that burn. I didn't have it on that. Oh shit, we got to get that, because otherwise we're not doing the right conditioning.
Pragmatic question for you, Bobby, since you have kids.
I do.
Kids lifting weights. We started our kids very young. In fact, by the time they could walk, they were actually doing, quote, resistance training. Obviously not with a weight, because there are no weights that fit a little kid. But this is one of the more controversial things, kids lifting weights. And I'm a big fan of kids lifting weights, learning how to move, doing speed stuff. We don't call it training. We just call it play.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts?
First thing that comes to my mind is I swear that I saw a study 30 years ago, at least, some kind of study or something anecdotal. Remember the Soviet Sports Review? And
oh, yes,
yes. Used to put on that. It's something like that. I swear I saw something that said school-age athletes lifting and a group that did not. That these grew to taller heights than these guys.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
The ones that did lift or didn't?
the ones that lifted were taller
Hmm.
than those who did not. And we all know that when bone is stressed, it grows, right? I mean, without breaking it, sure. So I've not seen anything that suggests otherwise. And, you know, when people think about weightlifting, you think about monster weights, like, squatting is, I put something out the other day, like, squatting is, trap bar deadlifts is the best thing for you. It's safer than squatting. I've seen to have injuries when we squat. And I said, well, I'm in my 42nd year. I don't know. I can't remember one athlete that I had in my care squatting and hurting themselves. Not one. So I think it's coaching, frankly, but
Agreed.
I also didn't put 405 on their back the first day we squatted either. Right. So, and I think these kids are already doing stuff. They're already stressing their bodies by falling down and tumbling and swinging and jumping, and they're jumping off the, like your kids, they were on your desk while you were typing and they jumped off the desk like, oh, that's a blast. And they, and pretty soon they're doing all this other stuff. And I think, well, that's terrific. On the other hand, these guys say, well, we should do something different than that. We'll just go body weight exercises. Okay. How many pull-ups can your son or daughter do? Well, they can do one. Like perfectly. Yeah. No, it's a strain. And they're going like that. And I say, well, that is probably more detrimental than doing a lat pull down for 10 reps. Because if weightlifting is tough and you're talking about loads, then one of these is going to be about 98% effort, right? Or the push-up that goes like that, like that's like a max bench press. So once you lay them down and give them a 5-pound dumbbell or a 2, but whatever that is, I think it's probably the oldest wives' tale that's out there, but I think there's good ways to do it. So I'm totally into it. Although I will say that activity is probably the best. Get them out and running around and do all kinds of stuff, and I think we've seen instances where playgrounds have been shut down or taken away, and now we got these soft mats and everything's low and careful and all that. I think you're taken away from the robustness that childhood play allows you, right?
Do you remember, and I remember this vividly, the playground thing that was a merry-go-round, but you would spin it as fast as possible. Everyone would get on and we would spin it as fast as possible, then jump off. It was sort of like weird plyometric training. We just didn't know it.
Or your buddies were so funny that they tried to spin it so fast you'd get thrown off. Like, ah.
Yeah, they don't let you do that anymore with kids. Kids are soft. That's the problem.
I guess. That's a shame but at the same time, I don't mind it. I think like you guys are, I don't mind if you're telling me what you're doing, but when you explain it with something that's not accurate, then I got to take exception to that. Like the trap bar deadlift's a perfect example. It's safer and it's easier to teach. And I say, well, only half of that's true, right? Is it easier to teach? Yeah, I guess you could be. But, even though it only takes me like, 10 seconds to teach a squat, but that's okay. If it's hard for you, that's, but the safer, why is it? Oh, because there's less shear and compression. That's interesting. Well, where do you think that? Well, because the bar's on the ground. No, you still get shear and compression just because the bar's not on your neck. Well, then it's less there. Well, no, because these muscles here go all the way to the back of your, right underneath there. So it's pulling on that. But the biggest part is that most people who do trap bar deadlifts, and these are people that say, yeah, so we don't squat. They look exactly like a squat, 100% like a squat, with the same compression and shear forces that will go up the more weight you add. So if you say it's easy for me to teach and supervise, I'd have to say, yeah, that's probably a good idea. If I'm in front of 40 high school kids in a PE class, let's put a trap bar on the ground. Let's raise it up. It's already a limited range of motion, sports fans. So don't say, oh, it's safer with less forces. Well, that's because you're not doing a full squat. But okay, I buy that. But if you say, but we also do that because it's less shear and compression, I go, oh, okay, I can't let that go. I'm gonna have to respond to that.
Tony, comments on that?
No, I do agree. I think if you're scaling it and you do have 40, 50 kids in the room, that it may be practical. It's an easier, it is, as far as safety is related to movement pattern. That's all. I mean, it's far more dangerous for anybody to get on an American football field than it is to squat. It's far more dangerous.
Right.
The sport itself is far more dangerous than the squat can ever be, right? Even on a tennis court, you watch Serena go from one end of the court to the other, propel herself at a miraculous speed, come to a dead stop, then go into a high velocity torso rotation with her forehand and slam the ball to the other side. I mean, what's safer than, every sport in and of itself proposes greater dangers than the squat itself. And if you squat effectively with the right loads, listen, I'm not saying every athlete has to do it, but at the same time, I'm not going to ever argue it's very dangerous. It needs to be replaced. Everything is context for sure. And if you have a young athlete who hasn't axial loaded in their life and needs to build a strong foundation, and we're not yet worried about moving in 70 different planes, then you know what? The squat could be a darn good exercise when coached properly. So, but again, to Bob's point, if I've got 40 kids and I can't spot them all, here's the great thing about the hex bar dead. If you can't lift it, you drop it. If you can't lift the squat and we don't have a spotter, then we have the problem. So
don't need a spotter.
But it's all really the objective and how many people you're working.
I mean, it's hard to come up with that whole generalized. It's safer and easier to teach. Like I just want good information to get out there. I mean, again, you mentioned that context is pretty important. And yeah, I mean, I think we've all used it. Some people squat and use the bar, some people just use the bar. But to say like, somebody was mentioned, it's the best bilateral. It's the far better bilateral option than any other squat. And I go, no, that can't be true at all.
You tell that to a guy who's 6'4" who can't even get inside a hex bar.
Well, yeah, and whose feet are relatively like you and me putting ours like this far apart. Like it's like that's the whole context. The whole context about this whole childhood training thing and going forward. That context is great. And you get to some level, and both of you have been at that, where the selection of exercise isn't necessarily based on physiology. Isn't based on sets and reps. It's what's your resources, what's your teaching skill, how much room do we have, how much time do we have, so when you say that's the best option, there's really, to me, Tony and Joey, it's, you don't want to do what works, you want to do what works best. In that case though,
like that.
Right, when you're in like for me, the first place, our room in Oakland was really small in the 90s, right, and I wanted to squat, I was gonna squat. But my thought was, this is how small I probably overemphasizing this too much, maybe a little bit of hyperbole, but I thought the room was so small that if I put a squat rack in there, invariably somebody's not going to put a collar on, and that thing flips, might walk out, half the room might be wiped out.
Right.
So I bought a Smith machine. There, that ended it. Is that my preference? No, but I thought that worked the best right there. So that's the other part of the context.
Exactly.
Forget the science for a moment. Sometimes you have to.
I have we're almost out of time, but I have a philosophical question. On social media, you'll often see the I guess the phrase "stay in your lane." I'm actually not a fan of that phrase, but I hear it a lot, particularly, and I hate to say it, particularly from people in the hard sciences, exercise science. It's always stay in your lane, stay in your lane. They might criticize a medical doctor or a physical therapist, athletic trainer, strength coach, or whatnot. And I'm a firm believer that everyone can have an informed opinion, whether or not they have formal training in it. I think where people run into issues is they often have an uninformed opinion, and that's where they get attacked. But just because you don't have a PhD or a medical degree does not mean you can't comment on the relevance of a study as it applies to your athlete. So when I see that stay in your lane stuff, I always cringe a little. I'm like, no, you got to know your limitations, right? And you got to know which questions to ask. And I think there's context lost when people just say, oh, stay in your lane. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. And in a way, it's like, and this is an old analogy, you guys will appreciate this. It's like nails on a chalkboard, right? Everyone's like, what the hell's a nail on a chalkboard? But anyway,
What's a
so
chalkboard?
what are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, I wrote what I consider a scathing article on LinkedIn. Go look for it. About first thing, hate it, hate that line, don't like it, never used it. It's for soft people who lack confidence, knowledge, and whatever else you want to put in there that's abrasive. It's a soft organization. It's not. It's somebody who's fearful of their own right. Like, stay in your lane. I would never. So when I started the high performance model at CSUN, I made sure, like, hey, look, everybody should have an opinion about what's going on here. So my example in that was got a nutritionist, got an athletic trainer, got a strength conditioning coach. We all start from the same academic background, right? We all start physiology at 1, biology 1, we all do that. And then as we get going, then it goes nutrition, and then we branch off, much like physicians do. They all have a core belief there, right? But enough start of the same sort of academic rigor that I should be able to discuss. Well, it's not really fair for me because you guys have turned me into a nutritionist almost here, but but to be able to comment on that, I think the operative word is informed, right? As long as you have an informed opinion, then you should bring something up. The last thing I want to do, and this is where the stay in the lane thing really gets to me, is hey, no, if you do your own job, I'll do mine. And I think, well, I don't want to do yours, but you're so bad, you're not helping me do mine. That's what I'm saying, right? So I'm able to say something about it. And here's a perfect example, something that's practical. If you have an athletic trainer in the weight room while you're lifting, I can only see so much. Hopefully I can see enough. But the minute I help somebody and there's somebody doing some, you know how kids are, you show them how to do something here, by the time you get down to platform 5, they're all jacked up again doing some who knows what, right? You got to come back and help. But to have an athletic trainer watch somebody perform a bad squat, allow them to do it, and they get themselves hurt. And then we figure out what happened. And the trainer says, well, I mean, I saw it, but that's not my place. I'm going to stay in my lane. Well, now somebody's hurt because of that.
Right.
Same thing like in the athletic training room, right? They've only got so many eyes and hands, and they're rehabbing somebody, and they're rehabbing legs and backs and trying to get this kid back. Well, they're trying to get them back to exercise without limitation, right? Which is the correct way to squat and deadlift and all that. So if a strength coach walks in there and they're doing something that nobody would consider a deadlift the way you would in the room, and just let it go, like, well, that's not my place, that's wrong. You got to pipe in there. I mean, it's a safety mechanism. But more than anything, I just think it's a system that's weak. If you have a system where people stay in your lane, we're not asking you to go outside your scope of practice. That's different, right? But we know just enough about everything, just us three here, to be able to say, I don't think that's enough protein, or I think that deadlift looks, doesn't look right. Or how long did it take to rehab that ankle? It was only a grade 2. It's now the 7th week. Like, well, it doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of conversations that should pop up in a safe environment. And where, again, what we do is we fix things, not fixing me. You don't fix you. You want to help other people. And so that's, you're going to have to put that aside for a minute. It might bruise you up a little bit, but in the end, the intent is going to happen the way you want it to be. Okay, we fixed that and we're helping somebody.
I like that answer. Stay in your lane. What do you think, Tony? Stay in your lane?
No, I think a couple of people during COVID probably should have. There were too many interior designers talking about following the science. Maybe that was the most appropriate time. But other than that, the lanes are on a highway, right? And you can still ride next to somebody. You can still share the same highway, and you can still see what they're driving. So as a result of that, hey, I think I'm always open to collaboration or thoughts and input, and I've had it a lot. And I just come back and say, okay, well, here's my thinking and why. But you bring up a great point. And under those circumstances, you may be right. So I love the dialogue. Sometimes I love the thinking. That isn't what I'm thinking, but that's good thinking. So we share lanes. I think that's how we all can get better. And like Bob said, if it's done cool, respectfully, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Why don't you try this? Great. Absolutely.
I think because there's a difference between asking a question and questioning. You know, I don't like to get questioned, but I'm certainly responsive to a question.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I think those and the intent behind, I don't know about creatine, I mean, there's a couple of guys cramping over here, like, whoa, wait a minute. If you say, like, where are we with the cramping now on this thing? And then that's okay. So now you're asking, and I'm going to help you a little bit. And that should answer both questions, right? The one that you're really asking that's disguised as a statement, right? And then the actuality of it. So I don't, and this thing evolves rapidly, like freaking Joey, I mean, the way I ask questions to him all the time, I'm not gonna jump out there knowing how fast this thing evolves in terms of science and nutrition and all that. So he gets the questions from me all the time. Hey, are we still doing this with this thing and that thing? Like, yep. Like, okay, good. I just want to make sure, like, as you never know,
Changes fast.
Yeah, I mean, really fast. So I do think of it in terms more of a system. Like, when you look at the high performance system, you can't have everybody in their lane. And so, and that's where that term, I don't know if you guys have heard this, but everybody talks about interdisciplinary. The newer term is transdisciplinary. Interdisciplinary meaning a team of teams, and transdisciplinary meaning one team. And that's the one I like. I like the one where we're all talking all the time. And we're going to have then there's a consensus, a safe consensus, instead of waiting like, I thought that was, not enough protein, but it wasn't my deal. Like, no, that doesn't work.
Well, Bobby, thank you for being on the show. Hey, congrats on your new position with the Los Angeles Angels.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Bob. I go out and buy an Angel hat this week, I think.
You guys come in. I see when we come down. How far are you guys from Miami?
I'm only about 40 minutes, 45, depending upon time of day.
Yeah, he's
Devil
close.
Rays? What about the Devil Rays?
I'm about a couple hours from Miami.
Oh yeah, when you come in for the maybe if you have any Marlins games, but that would be interleague. But nevertheless, I'll go out in Tampa and say hello when you play the Rays.
Come on out.
That's a deal.
Sushi for sure.
Well, thank you. Hey, you're a sports science dude, officially. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your knowledge.
I love it.
Fun conversation and informative. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bobby.
All right, guys. Take care.
Hey, bye-bye.